everyone. So we're talking today about managed intake, but I want to really start with how not to do managed intake. It's one of those topics that can really upset your community, can really upset pet owners. Partly, I think, because we call it managed intake. So my proposal is that the first thing we do is we stop calling it that. Instead, we need to call it what it is, something more along the lines of appointment-based or scheduled intake, or really, truly, the heart of it is that it's care-based intake. That we don't turn people away that need assistance, that we provide care in our discussions with them, that we bring in animals at a rate that we're able to also provide care as a shelter for them. How many of you run some kind of a shelter that has an appointment or scheduled-based intake? Most people. How many times has someone walked in and said, I need to surrender a pet, and the first thing out of your staff's mouth is, do you have an appointment? All the time. So this is definitely one of the ways not to run this program, is to say, sorry, you don't have an appointment, I can't help you. Oh, also, I can't make you an appointment. You need to go call this phone number, or you need to go on this website. That's the policy, sorry. Secondly, so you're moving to another state and you can't take your pet because the state's not accepting any more pets? I've heard that. Or, so you've been caring for this pet for a year, but you want to turn it in as a stray? Ultimately, it doesn't really matter why they're there, right? Or my very, very favorite, we're full. Pet owners don't care that. They need your assistance. So what we're proposing really is how to do this correctly, how to do this with sensitivity and customer service, how to not make it so regimented. We function in a gray world a lot. So in order to really solve problems, you have to be open to conversations. So what about the person that we talked about first that walked in and said, I have to surrender my pet. I don't have an appointment, but I'm here right now. And we have a conversation with them, and you find out that yesterday, his dog broke out of a rotted wooded fence at his house that he was renting, and his landlord said, you have 24 hours to get rid of this pet. And he spent the first night frantically calling all of his friends and family and trying to find somewhere for this pet to go. And then he had to go to work the next day, and now he's at your shelter because 24 hours are up. It's a little bit different than, sorry, I didn't make an appointment. When you have conversations with folks and you're trying to solve problems, you're trying to do that not just to benefit your shelter and the space that you have, to make sure that your staff can provide care, but also to help solve problems for owners.
Moving on to the next thing is like collecting information, and Sarah was going into it, quite a bit. So the folks that are doing your intake, whether it's the folks on the phone, doing the callbacks, you have to have a certain level of empathy. And these folks that are doing this job need to be really mindful as to the situation that Sarah was just explaining as to what these folks might be facing. They might have already gone through long processes to make that determination that it's time to surrender Fluffy, and it's pain them and hurt them, and even then they might show up callous, but they had to build up that strength in order to be able to drop off that dog that day in order to be able to get through it. So when you're going through, you have to ask the questions, why are you here? And it's not just as simple as going, how can I help you? Because they're going to start going down that process, and they're going to start explaining some things to you, and you have to be able to take the information that's going and sometimes just needle a little bit further, because you might be able to provide certain level of resources up front. You might be able to do a little bit more as far as other resources that are in the community. You mean, what have they tried? Have they reached out to one of the other local rescue groups that would be more particular for that type of pet before it hits the shelter environment? Have they reached out to family members? Have they asked neighbors and friends, especially if it's only going to be a temporary situation, before they have to relinquish it? And anyone who's been in this job for a period of time, you mean, you're going to see people at a very hard time in their lives where when they're bringing these pets forward. And again, what do you need? Do you have the ability to help them get through whatever that patch in their life is, to get them just a little further down the road to the point where they can care for that pet the way that they want to be able to do it, and they just can't do it right now? And as they're coming through the doors, may already have their mind made up as to what they want to be able to do, but they might not be aware of what you can also do as far as an organization to really push them down that road. And again, the whole conversation is like, what's the future of everything that we're doing here, and redefining it and helping people with where they're at. And finally, you land with, like, how can we help? Who here has programming to be able to support people when they show up at your doors? Okay. What if they call before? Do you have ability to direct them to what's going on in the community? And I'm not just talking like spay neuter. I'm talking, they need temporary housing. They need to board their pet for a period of time while they're going through something. Who has those types of programs? It got smaller. Who here is planning on having those types of programs? Who doesn't have the money? There we go. I figured that's a way to get everybody involved with this conversation. But this is really where the profession is going to. And so when we're talking about how to bring pets into the facility, we really have to start going down through and meeting people where they're at and trying to match what their needs are, rather than letting the shelter be that end-all be-all, like where this is where they part and they never see each other again.
One of the biggest frustrations for me is when I see somebody in our lobby trying to surrender a pet, and they're clearly in a crisis moment. They're crying, they've got maybe luggage with them, and to watch staff sort of be indifferent to that, and to treat that person the same as someone who walks in nonchalantly thinking, I just want to report a stray animal, I'm totally okay keeping it at my house. And that those two situations really have different levels of urgency and need to be treated differently. So when you're trying to determine urgency, it's important to look at, is the pet in pain? Is the pet suffering? Is the owner in crisis? Is the owner able to hold on a day or two? Asking them that. And knowing that it's okay to bring a pet in the same day. A lot of times our staff doesn't know that they have the power to do that, or maybe they don't have the power to do that. And it makes a huge difference. If you know that you really don't want to bring it in the same day if they just walked in, but you can if it needs to happen, and that you have the freedom to make that decision and treat those situations differently, it makes a huge difference.
All right. Anybody familiar with controlled depopulation? No. So what we're going to be looking at here, and do you remember how many dogs this was? Me and Sarah used to work together, so everyone knows. But
70?
No, it wasn't that many dogs.
It wasn't?
No, it was like 30 or something.
All right.
So here's a whole bunch of
more
dogs.
than 24 dogs.
Yeah, so
in
here's
this
a whole
yard.
bunch of dogs.
There was no more yard than that.
So this is a pet hoarding situation, and you go out there. You mean who's field services? Okay. So you go out, you get this reported. Various levels of condition of the yard, various level of health issues with all the dogs that are out there, and you're there, and what would be the age-old typical way of handling this? Pull them all. Is your shelter ready for 30 severely under-socialized inbred dogs with various medical issues? No, really? Shock. And so what we're going to be talking about here is how do you appropriately go through and manage those situations. And something that always seems to be a major point of impact for animal shelters are hoarding situations. And instead of bringing in 87 cats in one afternoon, maybe you only bring in 12. Because they're surviving in that environment to a certain level. And again,
What if you don't have a choice? Like,
what if you don't have a choice?
According to who?
Can we come back to that? Let me go through this and then we'll come back to it because it's a good question. And I might hit it along the way. I'll try to. But as you're going through and you have all these pets, you're out there and you want to assess which ones need to come in first. What are you going to be looking for? Severe medical. What levels of disease that you might be able to showcase in it. Who needs to come right now? And you have to do a bit of a triage to go through and assess what that looks like and determining what goes on. And it also depends on what your resources are to do in-field apprehension, for transportation, sheltering when they come back on the back side. And it takes a lot of people to be involved, from the veterinary teams and kennel teams and field and everything else along the way. So in this situation here, we ended up working with the local nonprofit shelter, pulled a lot of these dogs in. So the situation was, husband and wife were living in the house. That's the building to the right. She passed away a period of time before. Dogs were out of control. They weren't his dogs. They were his wife's dogs. So he's living, you can kind of see it in the back upper corner, on the outside of the fence. He was living in a camper on the back side of the property because you couldn't go in the house and you couldn't go in the yard. And so coming in and working with him and taking a certain number of dogs every single day over a period of a few days allowed us to control how intake came in. And so when you're out there in those situations, I'll try to hit, your question is, what if you can't wait? And my question to you is, what is the situation why you can't wait?
is animal control officers come with 30 cats maybe?
Sure. But that's where your relationship with them comes into play, because what she's saying is 30 cats just show up on your doors. That's a failure somewhere else in the communication and the relationship with animal control. And what animal control has, again, I spent a lot of time in the field and working that side of it, and they go someplace and someone's getting evicted, right? And here comes all the cats. Do you know what the rest of the house looks like? No one's moving in tomorrow. Like, what is the hurry? And if they are, I don't know who's renting it. But it's one of those things of like, we get in these mindset of like this feel of urgency. And yes, we want to get those pets out. We want to get them into the shelter and we want to get them moving on to the next steps of their lives. And that makes perfect sense. But are you creating further complications for yourself while being able to do it? It requires animal control, being on board with it, because again, the field has this bit of a mentality of like, we got to go and just grab them. Every single stray happy dog that we find, instead of just leaving it in its front yard, they bring it into the shelter. See, I got an eye roll. See? It's a thing everybody faces. But we're at a situation now where we can start looking at these things and having real open, honest conversations about what needs to come in today. That way the medical team can assess. Going through and bringing them in, running some tests, figuring out, and next thing you know, who's got ringworm, who has Khaleesi, that then allows the shelter to start building into what those next steps are to really help those pets, be prepared to take them on, provide that level of care, but doing so in a way that's really, I know I'm going to go back to the word you don't want me to use, but managed in this situation.
But, it's care-based, even when you're doing that, because as a shelter, you know how challenging it is when 30 cats show up, or 30 plus large dogs. And so the level of care that the shelter can provide gets real tight when that happens. You've got animals sitting in cages while you're trying to process the first 10 and there's 20 more to go. This house, I think it took us, I want to say it was a little over a week by the time we got the last ones in.
It was a little over a week, and he kept 2 of them. He had his 2 favorites.
Yeah. So if any of you heard Kristen talking this morning, and she was talking about how in Tucson we have a crazy hoarding issue in our community, we have currently a spreadsheet of cat houses that we're working on. That means there's more than 7 of those at a time. And we're going to each house every couple days and working with owners or property caretakers and bringing those cats in as we can care for them. Also taking into account the urgency and the medical needs of the cats. Do they have somebody providing food? Do they have water? Are they dehydrated, malnourished? Or are they doing fine and they're just not really friendly? And we can focus on some that maybe have a really severe URI or have ringworm or something else that needs to be treated sooner rather than later.
And one of the things, it's also providing those resources in those period of time. We've actually, while in PEMA, we had officers that actually went out and assessed, and they're like, okay, it's not good, but it's not a typical Tucson hoarding house where it's time to condemn the house. And we actually had officers go out and spend a little bit of time helping clean up the house, because that was a better use of those officers' time and that resource to get it to a point where it was at least acceptable for a period of time, which gave us a little bit more time to depopulate them over a period of time. But it was also building that relationship with them, right out of the gate, and showing we were here to help them. They felt more comfortable to be able to allow their pets go. One of the things you see with hoarding is that attachment component, where they think they're doing a really great job and nobody can do what they're doing, and you have to start meeting them. Again, it's that empathy level, and be able to go and say, like, no, we're here to help you. And once they get that trust and confidence, you have this ability to do it. Early in my career, my second week as an animal control officer, met a animal hoarder who is a bipolar schizophrenic with epilepsy who recently suffered a stroke. So that was my first foray into hoarding, which is why I truly believe in this approach. And I spent 1.5 years working with her before we got her down to 2 animals. But she was cooperative, doing what she could. As her health issues got worse, we would remove a few more. Then we always kept her at a managed level, which she was going to be able to maintain the pets. Had a very great heart. She meant those animals meant the world to her. So, and you also have to take that into consideration as well, because in these situations, you're taking whatever pretty much the only thing they have in their lives are going to be those animals, and you have to really take that into consideration.
And we've seen it with not just dogs and cats, but we've got a rabbit house. That's fun. We've taken in 63 beta fish. Everybody at work got a fish. Merry Christmas. You can see it with all kinds of animals, and it's important, like Adam's speaking about, to have the relationship building with not just the pet owner, but also if you are not operating field services and you're sort of getting these animals dumped on you, building that relationship and talking about a plan with your officers or your field services, as well as with like code enforcement, your sheriff or police, the fire, like all of those organizations, talking to them about this is what we're trying to do, this is why it benefits the pets, here's how you can help us do that. Most importantly, make sure that you're not leaving pets suffering or in danger. And I think people are most afraid that they're going to make an error in this.
Yeah, and it's one of those things of whether you're an officer out in the field making a judgment call, or whether you're working an intake desk, you're probably not a medical professional, you're not a veterinarian, and you have to be able to have the leeway to use judgment to be able to go and do it. And I always say, if you're in this profession long enough, you should be able to tell the little white cat there probably needs to be seen by someone. But some of those other cats might be a little bit harder to be able to go and make those determinations. But if you have any concerns, bring the medical team to you. Have them walk up to intake. Maybe take them out on that hoarding case with you. Fun side fact about Kristen, who did the opening speech today. Her second day in PEMA, she came to a cat hoarding house, and we had her walk through it. And that was her first, like, oh my God, like, this is what they look like out here. And so, but to be able to go and be able to pull medical teams in, I don't care if it's a tech or a veterinarian, start having them come out when they can actually do those assessments right there on scene and make that decision. Same thing if they're coming into intake. If you have any level of concern, you need to have somebody else come up and help you be able to do it. Then if you don't have that access, if you do feel there's a concern, it's better to probably grab that animal than leave it there. But hopefully, after any period of time, you should be able to make good judgment calls on that. That's it. So, and again, because managed intake, there's a lot of moving parts with us, right? And so these are just the key components that we wanted to, quickly touch base on, but what are you all facing? And we can try to help answer those questions. So the question was about receiving 8 to 10 owner surrender calls and maintaining empathy, right? Because you've heard everything that there could have ever been, and at a certain point in time, it just wears on you. You know, it just seems like it's just another excuse. And that's one of the hardships of being in that type of role within these organizations. But you need something that just allows you to be able to check yourself, because what we know and what we experience and the trauma that we go through working in animal welfare isn't something that that person understands or expects or could be empathetic towards us. And city or nonprofit? Municipal?
Nonprofit, running, accounting, municipal.
Oh, those are, okay.
Both.
Yeah, so you're a little bit of everything. So, you know, when you start looking at those things, you know, making sure you have, if you are government run, having EAPs, making sure you have supportive programming to be able to do it, because what you're dealing with, you know, everybody calls it compassion fatigue. It really should be called empathy fatigue. Because like, the compassion doesn't really shift away. It's just your ability to be able to process it and, you know, deal with it yourself is what's gone away. So it's more empathy based, and looking at programs to help people that way and make sure that you're self-conscious of it. Everyone here has faced depression at some point in this career, right? Or you just didn't want to get up and you want to go deal with it. It's part of that empathy fatigue. You mean, as far as it goes on with it, and then just helping people to check that, and always having a constant reminder to just remind them that person doesn't know your experiences, so you can't necessarily expect that same empathy in return. And then, you know, if hopefully you have empathetic people up there. Otherwise, see, that's more probably not the right people in the right job. So you have to work with that too if you're in have the ability to go and assess and do performance plans and say what is it you actually want to do, and shift them to a place where they can be successful, so you can get the right person answering those calls.
And I think I would add giving people a chance to rotate out of that into something that's more celebratory or more outcome-based, giving people a chance to participate in play groups or do enrichment or do adoptions, or really drawing attention to the successes and the return to owners and the animals that you did keep out of the shelter and you did help solve a problem for somebody. Acknowledging the wins is just as important.
How do you want to go around the room?
Over here.
So for your hoarding cases, how do you typically find out about those? Is it citizens calling in,
All of it.
So she's asking, how do we typically find out about the hoarding cases? Go ahead.
So it could be fire rescue going to a medical call. It could be law enforcement, or somebody else doing an eviction. It could be the neighbor calling. It could be you just happen to be in the neighborhood going up to a call because there was a complaint about the number of cats, and you get out of your vehicle and you're solid 50 feet away and you just know it because you smell it, that you have a hoarding house. So it could be a number of different ways to be able to do it, which is why those interagency partnerships are so key, because if it's fire and rescue showing up, they don't know what to do. If it's the police going there, they don't know what to do. So you have to have some of those relationships in place beforehand so they understand how they need to report it, what they can expect when we show up. And then once they're on scene, whoever's responding, animal control, needs to be able to work with property managers to let them know and explain these types of processes, because they're like, it's their property, right? There's a value loss as far as the damage, and they tend to be a little emotional and they want everything gone. But you have to be able to, again, another empathetic approach, meet them where they're at, help them to understand how we're going to do this and how it's going to be better long term. But it's coming from anyone and everyone. It could be a family member coming over to check on someone they haven't seen in X number of years.
That's very helpful, because some concerned person that's a hoarder, the person that thinks they're is blaming other rescues. So that's good. I will use that. Maybe it's your family. The other rescues. So that's helpful.
Well, it's one of those things of, if someone is making a complaint and you're doing a follow-up, it comes down to the individual agency as to what they're going to be comfortable with. But like, I would have no problem saying it was a neighbor, never specific. It was a family member, nothing specific. They're going to draw on it and figure it out anyways. But also at the same time, if you're responding out, all that information is public information anyways. So all they have to do is put in a request, they're going to get it. So up, down, left, or right of how much you want to give it in the beginning.
Are you going to try to mic people?
Yes.
We're not good
Who's
at
next?
repeating
Who's
questions.
the next victim?
Somewhere right here.
All right, I'm gonna.
Wherever you go.
I'm interested to learn more about like your model, like managed care flow. So like you have an online request form that keeps a list of people that want to surrender. You know, you call them as space becomes available.
That
like
sounds nice and automated.
and that's what I want to hear. Like what's ideal flow look like? Are you really just assessing it person by person, and then you also keep a list, or like just tell me about your ideal process?
We were lucky enough that in 2017, 16, received a grant that we used as seed money to start a pet support center, and it started with 2 persons. Call takers. I don't know why that sounded so weird. 2 people answering phone calls and scheduling appointments. And they started with really nothing. And they created a giant list of community resources and rescues and other organizations that are willing to pitch in on medical and boarding facilities and trainers and all of these things, and started just trying to help people solve problems. At the beginning, a lot of it was, sorry, you need an appointment and I don't have anything for 2 weeks. And it wasn't really service-based. It was operating kind of out of a necessity based on the volume of animals coming in and the space and construction and all kinds of things. And now it's, the county's taken it over. It's 3 folks. They answer phone calls either live or they return calls within 24 hours. They still do the same things, but one of the first questions that they're trying to answer for themselves is this person interested in help? Instead of trying to force them into help, does this person actually want to keep their pet, and can I spend time trying to solve this for them instead of trying to convince somebody that doesn't want their pet, no matter what, that really they do? So for us, people call in, they get an answer within 24 hours, they get solutions and alternatives, and then you get scheduled an appointment. There are times when we schedule appointments the very same day. There's times when we tell people, you know what, just come in right now. It doesn't matter if there's an appointment available or not, because the animal sounds like it's suffering. Just come in. There is no real black and white to that, because again, it depends. There's so many variables. I think ideal world, a way to make that a little bit more efficient is to have an online form where people can answer, yes, I'm interested in help, or no, I'm not. And then scheduling an appointment for us to call them, because we do spend a lot of time just swapping messages back and forth with people. And I think there's ways to make that more efficient for sure.
I can follow up on that. Can I just follow up on that question? That was a good one. I didn't mean to jump in front of anybody, but just on that same topic is, when I first a couple years ago, started learning about like surrender prevention and things like that, it was recommended to me to schedule out like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, because you're hoping that they're going to find another option. Is that something that is still being recommended? Or I know for emergencies you try to bring them in and all that, but I just wanted to kind of on the heels of what you were already saying.
As long as we can because of that reason, but again, it's really hard to hear somebody's tone of voice that they're in panic and to translate that into like a black and white procedure, right? So it does take some finesse and some nuance and some really paying attention to tone when you're talking to people.
Yeah, and for a different organization, we have a 311 system, and it complicates everything because we don't actually get the initial call. It goes to a call center that's run by the city, who they have their talking script for every single department in the city. Just depends on if you call up and like, I got a question, they go through like a binder finding what their response is going to be. So they all get added to a list through our 301 or CRMs, And then that actually gets disseminated out to a team that then goes through, that they have their designations. We don't have a cool pet support center that like PAC does. And so it's kennel supervisors and intake folks, and they all have their assignments of what they need to follow up on, and they call and then they make those appointments and have a lot of leeway as into you being able to make that decision. And then it's actually then further compiled by, we have a safety net program to be able to help with various levels of resources and working with a local nonprofit shelter alongside our municipality. And then we have different venues. If we, through those conversations, then it gets handed off over to someone else. Not a very good streamlined process. Do not recommend it that way. But the city won't let us break away from the 311 system. Won't let us do it.
I think that's the same thing they have here
It's horrible.
in Austin.
I get a lot of blowback of like, well, there's people on the wait list. I can't take you standing in front of me right now, even though something's urgent. And I think this seems right more to the like, you have to evaluate each individual in
Right.
each situation. And I don't want to get pushed back.
Right. What she's describing is when you have a wait list of people and someone else comes in, how do you justify sort of bumping them to the front? And I think it's a conversation, of course, right, with your staff and your team, and understanding and explaining that the animal that's got a bone sticking out is more urgent than, I don't know, the mom cat that's living in a garage.
So we've got about 10 more minutes. More questions?
In the middle.
All right.
So we are county ran, county funded, and we're not able to turn away any, if you are a Carroll County resident, if you bring it to us and it's a domesticated animal, we have to take it.
Correct.
Because our commissioner is of the mindset that if we say no, they're going to end up on a dirt road anyway, and it'll end up being at the shelter anyway. So what is your recommendation on presenting it in a way that is extremely, extremely just aha moment?
So anytime you get into elected officials, it's not about the topic in which that you're probably discussing with them. It's going to be more based off of your relationship prior to. I think one of the things when we're dealing with elected officials where we really fail is we wait till we need something from them or we need a change. We don't actually go and spend the time talking with them and letting them know what we're doing in the processes. So before you need to ask them for something, like they already have a foundation of information to be able to come to that conclusion on their own. Elected officials love to believe it was their idea, right? And you know, in all reality, it probably wasn't. Somebody else came up with the idea and they're the one that like pushed it forward. So like if we know that about them and we have those relationships, we can actually do a much better job of targeting to get the programming where we need it to be. Yes, you're not going to get it tomorrow. It might take a period of time. You might work really, really hard with your county administrator, and then they're gone. And all that work is gone, and you have to start over again. But that's just a reality of it. But you have to be pretty tenacious in going out there and being, hopefully you're in a position to where you can go have those conversations with those folks so you have that relationship in place. Because really when you're selling these ideas, they're buying into the individual because they don't really know how shelters are run. But if they have a good relationship and a trust behind the person that's bringing it to them, then you're more likely to get early buy-in versus have to really push really, really hard and try to sell something.
And then what are the other two things politicians care about? Money and re-election. I heard both of those. So definitely taking a look at, is there a way to explain this in a way that talks about being more fiscally responsible or being gaining more support of your community, reducing complaints, like trying to figure out and stay ahead of those issues and say, you may hear this, but here's the reality or here's what's going on.
And being prepared with whatever predetermined talking points as to this old notion of like, this is how things are going to be, and finding something that you can be able to utilize. Talk to other shelters who have gone through this process, because we don't just have a whole bunch of dogs running around in our parking lots. You know, that's a reality of it. If somebody like comes up and says, well, I'm just gonna leave it in your parking lot, and they're pretty serious, just take it. not in our jurisdiction, just take it. We'll get it transferred to the other shelter later. Don't fight with them, don't argue with them. And but you have to, if you're in a management leadership point, you really got to empower those team members to feel comfortable that they can go and make the decision, because more times than not, indecisiveness is going to cause you the problem.
And I will say a lot of times your staff doesn't know how to have those conversations. I've had staff say, oh, this guy dumped all these dogs and said they were strays, but he's pretty sure he'd been caring for them. And I called him, and within like 2 minutes he was like, yeah, I've been caring for them, and now their owner surrenders and they're all available and they don't have to sit. But they didn't know how to get that answer out of him. They just knew, well, he said stray, so being able to sort of role play or have those conversations with your staff to help them learn where they have leeway to make decisions.
Got one more here.
So I believe I'm her neighbor. I'm in Douglas County, and in 2012 we stopped taking owner turn-ins. We heard the same thing about from the commissioners, that they were afraid that we would have more strays dumped. We didn't find that this happened because we started asking questions when they come in. We have the pet pantry, so if somebody can't afford food or vet care, we feed their animal and then they can divert that money into vet care. But if you need to talk to me to help get your commissioners on board with this, we've been through it. So we didn't see any more, but it helped our intake numbers tremendously. Yeah.
And your neighbors, right? Even better.
That's one of the things that I love about this conference.
So I'm from Hillsborough County, Florida, and we actually did get buy-in this year from our county administrator and our county commissioners. So we're starting managed intake this year. What advice would you give us?
Stop calling it managed intake.
What do you have in plans for dealing with the pushback? Are the teams ready to deal with, you mean the disgruntled person who may be told over the phone, who's now going to go and talk to whatever municipal higher up? Everything with me being in a city, it's I'm going to the mayor. Go, have fun. And you're going to get the same answer when it comes back down. Is your team ready to be able to take that on? And it doesn't even have to be around this process, but any type of programming, to be able to make those decisions and being supported in order to do so that way they can be effective in their jobs.
Yeah, and also map out what it looks like. So if you're going to start doing this, what does that mean? How do people get animals to you? How do they make appointments? How do they find alternative placement or resources? Do you have somebody answering phones? Do you have a 311 system? Do you have to have a wait list? Trying to figure out what that looks like so you can sort of stay ahead of any problems that might pop up. Adam and I are both here all weekend, so please feel free to reach out or find us or chat with us. And thank you very much.